Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, a look back at the stories of 2024, Israel changing the face of the Middle East, the decimation of Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, the fall of the Assad regime after 50 decades, growing anti-Semitism around the world, fueling more immigration of Jewish people to Israel. Join our CBN News team as we review these major stories. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. In today's program, we're looking back at the events of 2024. What a year. The Middle East is a very different place now than it was 12 months ago. We'll hear from our in-house correspondents about what stood out to them this past year. But first, we'll start off with a conversation I had with CBN senior reporter Dale Hurd. Take a look. Dale Hurd, CBN News senior correspondent, great to be with you. And as we look back on 2024, but you know, it seems like even 2024 is in the shadow of what happened on October 7, 2023. Talk about the global anti-Semitism that really has exploded in the last year and since October 7th.
And isn't that telling about Western society that, yes, there was an initial outpouring of sympathy, but you have to say that anti-Semitism exploded in the West this past year. And I'll never forget feeling shocked when I was getting interviews in London with Jewish groups, and they made me promise to delete their address after the interview. They have secret locations and, of course, security. I mean, it's like getting into Fort Knox when you visit their office. And this is in London. This is in Britain that once had a Jewish prime minister, Disraeli. Things are really different. And, you know, it's more complicated than just saying that it's demographics, that it's the influx of people from the Muslim world, because it's also a lot of this is from politically correct native English, Germans, French who've been brainwashed at university.
We saw an example of that anti-Semitism in Amsterdam, where, you know, Israeli were attacked by mobs. Not only so in England, it's also in the Europe as well.
Oh, yeah, it's a problem everywhere. So Jews are everywhere in the West. Jews are talking about leaving. Maybe not in the United States so much, but in England, all the Jews said, no, everyone's talking about, you know, as a last resort, let's be ready to leave. Let's be ready to go somewhere. And it's this case in just about every nation in Western Europe. Jews are probably safer in Eastern Europe because those countries, which the EU thinks are tyrannical, have restricted immigration from the Muslim world. But in the Western world, Jews have to be very careful. And I'm always concerned when Israel scores a success on the battlefield in the Middle East, if Muslims in Europe, in England, and even in the United States are going to take it out on Jews there.
Yeah. And here at the end of 2024, we just saw the collapse of the Bashar Assad regime that surprised so many. Talk about Syria, and also one of the factors of anti-Semitism is the massive immigration to Europe, from many of them from Syria.
Yeah, I did stories showing the long lines. I mean, it was like a snake going from the Middle East through into Europe and into Southern Europe. It caused a lot of fights in the European Union because countries wanted other nations to close their borders because they all wanted to get up to Germany where they got the best deal, so to speak. And now the Germans want to know, hey, do you want to go back now that Assad is gone and there's going to be an Islamic government in Syria? And they probably aren't going to want to go back, although some of them will. But I was amused at all the optimism over the future of Syria, because And I even saw Christians celebrating, which I thought that can't be real, because surely Christians in the Middle East know that they had a better deal under Assad than they will under a group that's been affiliated with Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. So.
Yeah, exactly. Dale, you cover Europe. You've been covering Europe for so many years. What are the trends in this past year in terms of the governments either falling or actually the governments going to the right?
Yeah, Europe is still going right because the left has not figured out a solution yet to their predicament. And this is their predicament. They've lost the working class, just as they have in the U.S. The Democratic Party is now primarily a party of intellectuals and elites, and the working class has gone right, and the working class is gone right in Europe as well, and in mostly because of the green agenda. If you can pin it down on a single thing, it's the green agenda that's made Europe poorer. Europe's economy has been flatlining now since about 2016, 2015, while America's has grown. And as you'll see more and more stories showing Europe getting poorer, and they're going to have to decide eventually what they're going to do about the green agenda, because that, along with regulation, is really weighing down their economic growth.
Yeah, a last question with about a minute to go, Dale. In terms of looking back to 2024, how could you sum up this year through the stories that you've been working on?
Boy, that's a good question, but I guess it's been revolution is too strong of a word, but people have had enough. They've had enough in the United States. I think that's what led Donald Trump to victory, and you're seeing they've had enough just about everywhere. You know, they did this very unscientific informal poll in Britain, and they got millions of people saying that the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, should resign already. People are looking, they're feeling poor, they're feeling oppressed, and they're looking for a way out, and that's why I think everything in Europe is going right.
Yeah. Well, Dale Hurd, thanks for your perspective on 2024. And our next program, we'll be looking forward to your perspective on the coming year. Thanks so much. Coming up, our Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl shares her thoughts on the biggest stories of 2024. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. I'm joined in our studio with Julie Stahl, CBN Middle East correspondent. Julie, when I think of the year in review, I don't think back to January 1st. I really go back to October 7th. I mean, I think that's really the year kind of in review that we're looking at.
Definitely. I mean, that time changed. Everything changed from October 7th, and that's everything we're involved in now goes back to then.
Yeah. How has Israel managed in these past 15 months or so?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you consider what really has happened in these months, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Whether it's hostages or, the battles in the north and the south, the attacks on the farmlands, I mean, on the people, it's pretty amazing. She's fighting on all fronts, and it's been an intense time, but it's been full of victories, but also a lot of pain.
Yeah, a lot of pain. Talk about the pain right now, because it's just such a angst about the hostages. It's so hard, certainly on the families and the loved ones, but also the whole nation.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's something like it really has had a huge impact on the whole nation. I mean, Israel, as much as they can clash with each other, they are one family. Mm-hmm. And they feel that way. They act that way. They respond that way. Just because it was so-and-so's brother or sister or father or mother, no, it was like it was mine. Mm-hmm. So, Israel very much relates to the whole hostage situation that way.
Yeah.
I mean, nevertheless, it's been kind of hijacked in a way politically, but...
Right, exactly. Yeah. And you talk about the resilience and also the victories. Who would have known from October 7th, when it's just such a horrific day, and also how resilient Israelis have been, how the IDF has been, and the victories of such a turnaround in so many fronts in this war.
Yeah, what do you think surprised you the most about all this?
Well, I think I would go back to the beepers in Hezbollah. I mean, that was the beginning, and I think before that, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, there's some surprises coming, and I think that was one of those surprises where the beepers just really, I think, put Hezbollah on the back foot, so to speak, where so many operatives were disabled, some were killed, some were out of commission, and I think it really shook the whole organization. And that was just the beginning of the dismantling of Hezbollah, which had been sort of Israel's main nemesis other than Iran, and all of a sudden they were dismantled. Nasrallah was killed. The whole leadership was eliminated.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah. Well, let's see. Surprises. I don't know. I think a lot of surprises. Maybe, you know, like with the whole thing with Hezbollah and everything. I think it's really important to remember like where it started. They joined the war on October 8th.
Right.
Unprovoked.
Yeah.
And just to side with Hamas or to do whatever they wanted to do. But this kind of escalation that led to the ground invasion started with a Hezbollah rocket in Majd al-Sham's northern Israel that killed 12 children on a soccer field on a Saturday afternoon. So, you know, I mean, who do they have to blame for it but themselves?
Yeah, and you went up there to meet some of the families.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, they were grieved, they were shocked, they were really hurt by the whole thing. But you know, they're pretty calm people in general, and they, you know, they weren't violent but they were hurting really bad. Yeah. But you know, I think also something that's very interesting is that after the Syrian overthrow, that the Druze communities in Syria and Lebanon said, hey, we like what's happening with the Druze community in Israel. We'd like to be part of that.
Yeah, and they have a history of sort of being having a loyalty to the government that overseeing. Yeah. Very interesting time. But the Majd al-Sham's incident, that was probably the most well-known rocket attack, but believe there were like more than 13, maybe 14,000 rockets that were fired by Hezbollah in the past year or so, or since October 8th.
Yeah.
And yet Israelis have endured that all the way through.
Yeah, they really have, you know, and they keep going. They keep being strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about Syria? Did that surprise you?
That definitely surprised me. I mean, it just happened. It seemed to happen overnight, but you know, the whole thing with Hezbollah being, I guess, out of the way, so that the rebels could take down Assad and his regime. Regime had been in power for 50 years.
Yeah.
So.
You know, as we've reported on this for the last, since October 7th, there's been so many historic changes that happen one after the other after the other. It's almost like you kind of process one dramatic change and then another one comes.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
And how have you kind of managed through this?
Well, I think, you know, you just have to keep kind of hanging on to the Lord and knowing that He's really in charge. I think especially with the hostages and what's gone on with them, you know, this year, you know, it started with a lot of hope because there had been a hostage deal.
That's right.
And then there was a rescue of 4 hostages, including Noah Argamani, whose mother's last dying wish was that she'd see her daughter, which she did. Yeah. But then we had ended up with some of the very prominent hostages being killed during the summer. Hirsch Goldberg, also an American citizen. And, you know, that really devastated a lot of people, I think. Yeah. And kind of shifted things.
And how about the relationship between, as we have like 30 seconds left, Julie, between the U.S. and Israel during this past 14, 15 months?
I think it's been strained. But, you know, they kept up a good appearance, and they kept, you know, and there was, you know, Rafah, where Biden prevented Israel from going in for months, and which basically delayed the end of the war. So, you know, there was a lot of under the cover friction, I think.
That's right. Yeah. Well, next year we presume there's going to be a big change with the election of President Trump, and after the tension of the last year. Julie, thanks for your perspective. Still ahead, we'll hear from Middle East analyst John Wagee and CBN correspondent Paul Strand on the major events of 2024. Welcome back to our Year in Review Jerusalem Dateline program, and I'm joined here in our studio with CBN News Senior Editor John Waggy and CBN News Senior Correspondent Paul Strand. John, first to you. Time magazine said that President-elect Trump, was the man of the year, but you have a different view of that.
A slightly different view, Chris. I mean, Trump certainly qualifies as the man of the year, obviously, but you could make a very, very good case for Benjamin Netanyahu having been the man of the year. And you know, recently the head of the Freedom Party, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, came and visited Israel, and he said that Netanyahu has changed the Middle East in 1 year more than the European Union did in 70 years. Now, some people, you know, blasted him for making such a comment, but really, on the face of it, it could be true, because the Oslo process and the giving up of Israel of land for promises of peace is so ingrained in the international community that when Netanyahu legitimately retaliated for the horrible massacre of October 7th, it was seen as just something that Israel went way out of bounds on. But the reality of it is, by the end of 2024, we saw that Syria had fallen, that Gaza is no more in many places. Amazing attack on the Hezbollah leadership to completely eliminate it, and the device of the blowing up of the pagers. I mean, these are all huge, huge developments in themselves, but put them together, and they have the potential now of seeing a possible redrawing of the lines, the maps in the Middle East.
If I may, I think the big thing that we can see out of it all is that at the start of all this, Iran, with Hamas and Hezbollah and all their other proxies, were basically out to wipe out Israel. That's their very purpose in life, almost, is to wipe out Israel. And I think what has been proven over this year is that they can't destroy Israel, but to their bad fortune, Israel's shown that it can destroy them. And I think, interestingly enough, the one thing that's kept them all alive, these three parties, these terrorists, is that the Biden administration has just stopped Israel again and again. And I think that's very ironic that supposedly Israel's very best ally in the world, the United States, is actually the one that's stopping it from just crushing these enemy forces and wiping them out so that Israel can finally really be safe.
Yeah, they micromanaged the war. They actually had a limited arms embargo. And John, you've made the point that really politically they were opposing Netanyahu and actually trying to undermine his government.
I don't know if we've ever seen anything like it. The kind of, you know, we've heard year after year after year about don't meddle in the affairs of other nations. And this was an outright direct challenge to the people of Israel to oust their prime minister, who was freely elected at the end of 2022. I mean, it's just really remarkable. And you had also a serious movement inside Israel for the same thing to happen, all under the cloak
and working together, by the way.
Yes, and under the cloak of working on behalf of the hostages, hostage release. And so what you ended up with is headlines almost on a daily basis. Paul, you can attest to it. You can too, Chris, that it was like almost near another hostage deal. How many times did we see that over the course of the last 7 or 8 months, even really all 12 months of 2024? It was like we were always going to be closer and closer to a hostage deal, and the world seemed to be revolving around whether a deal was signed and sealed. And in the meantime, on the ground, Israel was taking care of business not only in Gaza and the leadership in Gaza, but the leadership of Hezbollah as well, to where it's a completely transformed landscape.
And you know what's interesting about the hostage thing is I think the world looks at it and says, why doesn't Israel do something? Why don't they do whatever it takes to get the hostages free? And what I think I've seen over this long time now that they've been held is that we have two absolutely diametrical demands. Hamas can't let them go because they think Israel will obliterate them. So they're demanding that, Israel's forces leave Gaza and then the hostages could come out. But on the other hand, Israel has absolutely sworn that it will knock out Hamas. There's no more Hamas to threaten Israel like October 7th again. So how do you ever put those two together that Hamas survives or Hamas gets obliterated. I don't see how the two parties can come together and agree. I think maybe a short-term thing that, lets everybody say, let's just take a breath from the war. But I don't think Israel can give up its thing that they're not going to leave. They're going to wipe out Hamas. And I don't think Hamas can just say, oh, sure, take the hostages and now wipe us out.
Yeah, that was such a theme throughout the whole year. And at the end of the year, in a year of so many major stories, the fall of Damascus. Oh, yeah. Paul, talk about that, and also any final thoughts from you, and then you, John.
Sure. I think what's so fascinating about this is there's a nation, Syria. By the way, it was cobbled together by the French and the British, so it's sort of an artificial nation in a way. But how quickly it fell. I mean, in less than 2 weeks. And it reminded me of Afghanistan, where the Biden administration was pulling out, but was saying, "Oh, don't worry, we've trained the Afghan army well. They're fine." And they were gone in, what was it, 2 or 3 days? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it's shown to me that nations are just so shaky, especially here. And you've got to wonder if right next door to Syria, Iran is now in a bit of a panic because maybe they could fall. Jordan, which has been pretty peaceful with Israel, they've got to worry. They're right below Syria. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of these rebels that don't like the Jordanians very much. So I think we have seen that the world is a whole lot shakier. Things are not as permanent as you may think.
Yeah. Final thoughts for the year, Paul.
I think that's about it. I feel bad about the hostages. I can't see how they get out. Netanyahu, I'm amazed he survived, and I'm amazed the lesson that he's taught all these terrorists that you can't kill us, but we can kill you.
Yeah. John?
You can't leave 2024 without thinking about the United Nations, about UNRWA, about the future of Gaza, and how long is the world going to continue to really persecute Israel through lawfare and through resolutions. And I think that their days may be numbered for behaving in that way.
Yeah, we'll be looking forward to that in 2025. John, Paul, thanks so much. Thanks. Well, that's all for this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline, looking back at 2024. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and you can access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. Be sure to sign up for our email blast so you can get information on breaking news. And please keep praying for Israel and for the peace of Jerusalem and for the safety of IDF soldiers fighting on so many fronts. And for all of us here in the Jerusalem Bureau, I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.